We're hosting today Dr. Dennis Proffitt from the University of Virginia. When I was 18 years old, I didn't know what class to take, and I made one of the most haphazard decisions in my life, which was to take a class based solely on the fact that there was an Escher drawing on the website for the class. And that has led to many, many decisions in my life, which eventually got me to Google via Hawaii. And the man responsible for that is Dr. Dennis Proffitt, who's here today. He is an expert in visual perception, cognitive psychology, and has a very interesting talk here today that I believe will change the way that you see the world pretty literally to some extent. So I hope that you will enjoy the talk. I'm very, very proud to have him here today. And when I first started at Google, he was the first person I thought to bring. And so here we go.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Jenny.
Hello. Hello. So please feel free to interrupt, make a comment, ask a question at any time. I'm happy for you to do that. What I'm going to talk about today is the perception of spatial layout, which is just basically the fundamental question of how things look. And I think most of us begin with an assumption, which is certainly the assumption that I had, that other species see the world pretty much the same way that I do. So the frog here sees the world pretty much the same way I do, except frogs aren't real smart, whereas I am. And so I can make many more decisions about what I see, perhaps, but basically the same world is out there, and so we must be seeing the same thing. Well, that turns out to be false. So if you look carefully at what a frog sees, it basically only sees four things. It sees edges, it sees moving edges, it sees a decrease in illumination, and it sees small, erratically moving spots. And if it sees a small, erratically moving spot, it will reflexively attempt to catch it, and this is called a bug detector. Now, one of the ways that we know that frogs don't see things the way we do is that a frog will starve to death in an aquarium of dead flies. And the reason for that is it can't see them. Almost all of the world that the frog lives in, it can't see. It only sees what its species through evolution has made valuable for it to see because it can support its ways of life. The same is true of us. We see what people see, and we don't see all that's there, and we don't see the same thing that other species see. Now, that's the first assumption. Now, the next assumption is, okay, well, everybody sees the same world the same way as everybody else, and that assumption is also false. So here are two individuals. They have very different phenotypes. It is their bodies are obviously different. And what I'm going to develop in the talk is that the world that each of these individuals sees is as different as the different bodies that they have. We all see a unique world, and it is specific to our individual phenotype. All right. So to develop this idea, what we need to do is to begin with what is the information for visual perception. And the information is shown here in this little animation. So what's being shown is we've got a fellow who's getting up and sitting down. This is an animation from a book from an important perceptual scientist named James Gibson, whose work I follow. And what is being shown here is that what's present to the eye are angles, that is, they're rays of light, in this case coming from the edges of the main object in the environment, and these are converging on a point of observation, and these are visual angles, and they're specifying where things are and how where things are change as the observer moves. If we replace the observer's head with an eye, you can get a better idea of what the information is for visual perception. And if we simply take away the body, this is it. So the information that is available for your perception of the world consists of information about location, where light is coming from and how much light is coming from where. And in fact, if you look across species at what eyes have evolved to do, they have evolved to solve the problem of figuring out how much light is located where. Now, the next thing we need to do is say, what do organisms do with this information? And they basically make two uses of it. So there's two kinds of vision. The first kind of vision is vision for action in the sense that this is how we take information and guide our actions with it. And I'm going to take an example, and the example is catching a fly baseball. So in this wonderful season of baseball that is just finishing up, what you have is a situation where the pitcher pitches the ball, and if the batter hits the ball to an outfielder, the outfielder will try to intercept the ball and catch it. And here's what it looks like from the perspective of the outfielder. And this is work of Macbeth, Schaefer, and Kaiser from 1975. And what they showed is, let me move away from the mic for a second. I can take this with me. So this is the outfielder. This is home plate. This is the trajectory of the baseball. The outfielder is going to run to intercept the ball. And if the outfielder looks at the ball, then these rays along the path that the outfielder is running are going to the baseball, okay? And if the baseball player is able to run in such a way as to nullify the curvature of the ball, then he is guaranteed to be hit in the head by the ball. Okay, this is the way this heuristic works. So if I look at the ball and it's curving in this direction, and I run in that direction just in such a way as to nullify that curvature, the ball will hit me in the head. Cool. So there's a couple interesting things about this heuristic. One of the, whoops. Oh, I took it out. One of the interesting things is that if I'm going to follow this heuristic, then I'm going to have to run on a curved path. That is, if I knew where the ball was going, I would run on a straight path there, but outfielders don't do that. In fact, I have to run on a slightly curved path. The other thing to recognize is that I don't really know where I'm going. I think that I do, but the heuristic that is guaranteeing interception doesn't specify anything about the location where the ball is going to land. It simply ensures that I will catch it. Okay, so visually guided heuristics. As best we can tell, the actual execution of actions is guided by these heuristics. The heuristics act directly on angles. Remember, the angles are the information that we're given, and they're not converted into environment-specifying meanings, meaning that I catch the baseball without specifying anything about where the ball is, where I'm going, what the speed of the ball may be, how high it may be going, what the spatial layout of the field is. I simply follow this simple heuristic. Now, on the other hand, the baseball player who's actually catching the ball has an awareness that, well, here I am. I'm on a baseball field. I perceive its layout. The ball is coming towards me. I must know where I'm going because look at me run. In fact, the visual guidance of action heuristic that the runner is following doesn't specify any of the awareness that the baseball player has. It simply guarantees that he will catch the ball.
Have you tested that?
What?
Is there some way for you to know that he's being driven by a heuristic off an angle off the ball and not by his understanding of his position on the field and the ball trajectory?
If he knew where he was going, he would run in a straight line to catch the ball because that would be the shortest path to it. He doesn't run in a straight line. He and professional baseball players and even frisbee dogs run in the more curved and somewhat slightly less efficient paths that the heuristic prescribes. Okay? Now, on the other hand, so here's an image from where I live. And what I have as an awareness, if you can imagine yourself standing on that road, is there is space. It has extents to it. There is a building out there. It has a size and a shape to it. There are posts. All of these things have dimensions which are not angles. They're angles appropriate for spatial extents. And if one is going to perceive, as we do consciously, the extents and the shape and sizes of things in the world, then we need to take those visual angles and transform them into units that are appropriate for extents, sizes, and shapes. And the way that we do that is with our body. So Protagoras said long ago that man, by which he meant the body, is the measure of all things. And what I'm going to hopefully show you is the way that we see the world is by taking the manifest visual angles that are inherent in proximal stimulation and transform those into units that derive from the body, and that we thereby see the world always relative to our body. So, what is a body? Well, at a first approximation, a body consists of three things. There is a morphology, which is the semi-permanent structure of the body, form and size. It's fairly slow to change under most circumstances. There is physiology, which is the internal environment. It's basically all of our metabolical processes, and it's fairly fast to change. And then there is behavior, which is the fastest to change, and which consists of our behavioral repertoire and our immediate actions. And what I'm going to talk about today is we use all three of these in different situations to transform the visual angles that are available as information into a specification of the extent of things. So let me make this concrete, and I'll give you an example, and then I'll talk about some research. So the first example is size matters. So think about Gulliver's Travels, and think about Gulliver and the Lilliputians. For Gulliver, the Lilliputians and the things in their world are small. For the Lilliputians, Gulliver and the things in his world are large. What is a substantial rock for a Lilliputian is a grain of sand for Gulliver. They are measuring things obviously relative to their body size. So we can look at that in a little more detail. So one of the questions that people in perceptual psychology argued about for 100 years was, how is it that we perceive the constant size of objects given that the visual angle subtended on the retina for any object, its size varies with distance. So the far pillar is smaller as it projects to your eye than the closer pillar, and yet they both look to be the same size. And what is specifying that they are in fact the same size is a ratio, and that is the extent of the object above the horizon, which we'll call A, relative to the extent of the object on the ground to the horizon, which we'll call B, is a constant for all objects of a constant size so long as they are on the ground and you happen to be on the ground with them. So let's look at two individuals of different sizes. So the first person, the guy on the right, let's call him Bob. He has an A over B ratio, where A is a small proportion of B, whereas for the smaller person, A is a different proportion of B, and so the object is specified relative to her eye height as being bigger. Now, the horizon intersects all objects in the environment that are bigger than you at your eye height. Moreover, the horizon, even if you can't see it, is well specified. So if I move forward towards that pillar, all of the optical texture that is below my eye height moves down. All of the optical texture that's above my eye height moves up. And so simply by moving back and forth a little bit, I can discover the horizon, and I can then scale the size of everything in the world as a proportion of my eye height. I have an A over B ratio, and this is true for things that are smaller than my eye height, as well as things that are taller than my eye height. Now, if we go back to these two individuals, Bob on the left sees all of those pillars as being a constant size, as does Sue, the smaller person on the right, but Sue lives in a smaller world because the altitude of her eye, her height, is shorter than Bob's. She sees things as being larger. Now, there's an important idea here, and that is the smaller your perceptual ruler, the larger will be the extents that are measured on it. Okay, smaller rulers, bigger extents. Yes?
So the direct consequence of that would be if people looking at street view images would perceive things around them to be shorter than they would perceive them if they were standing in the middle of the road.
If they assume that what they're seeing in street view is taken from their eye height, and the eye height is actually higher, then they will perceive things as being smaller. That's right. As an aside, I did a considerable amount of work with Walt Disney Imagineering, And one of the real problems we had was getting people to scale the size of things, because people do assume a default eye height. And we were working in an Aladdin world where we were allowing them to fly on a magic carpet. And this just made everything begin to look like toys. So yes, this is an issue. Okay, one more conceptual idea, and then I'll go on to the research. So here's an image of me. And the question is, what ruler do I use? So the body is going to provide me with a plethora of rulers. Which one do I use? I find myself in this situation, and in any environmental situation, there are an indefinite number of things that I could do, that the environment offers for me. It's what Gibson's called affordances. So I could walk on a trail. I could bend over and pick up a rock. I could throw the rock. I could get across the stream if I'm willing to jump across the stream. So these are the things that I could do. Depending upon what it is that I decide to do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my body into a machine that allows me to do that thing. So I'll turn my body into a walker if I decide to walk, and that will be my phenotypic organization. I'll turn my body into a reacher, and then a grasper, and then a thrower. If I decide I want to throw a rock, I'll turn my body into a jumper, and I'll organize myself to do that if I elect to cross the stream by jumping over it. And so there is a sequence of things that happen. Depending upon my purposes and what is available in the environment, I'm going to undergo a phenotypic reorganization in which I turn my body into that kind of machine necessary to do what I want to do. And that reorganization is going to determine what aspect of my body is relevant, and that aspect of my body will then be used as the measuring stick, and it will provide the meaning for the perception. Okay? So let's go through the research and we'll look at some examples. So what is going to be relevant for reaching? We're going to reach to an object that's going to be within an extent in near space. What's going to be relevant is going to be my morphology. Can I reach the object? What is the length of my arm? And the behavior, the activity of reaching. We need to introduce one more relevant concept here, and this is the idea of an action boundary. So any kind of action has an extent over which that action can be realized, and that's called an action boundary. So in this slide, this little guy would like to punch the bag. Unfortunately for him, the punching bag is beyond his action boundary for punching, and so he can't punch it. So the extent to which he can reach is going to define, in this case, how far he can punch. So in the first set of studies that we did, what we did is we manipulated a person's reachability, and I'm just going to give you the results of that, and then I'll talk in more detail about, in another set of studies, we'll just look at individual differences in reachability and show you that people that have different arm lengths perceive the world as being different in near space. So in terms of arm length, what Jessie Witt did, Jessie was a graduate student of mine, she's now a professor at Purdue. She had people reach to objects that were in arm's reach or just beyond and make distance judgments about how far away they were, and I'll explain what she did in a bit when we get into the next set of studies. And in some cases, they reached with their arm, and in some cases, they reached by using a hand tool, in this case, a conductor's baton. And what she finds is that for those objects that are out of arm's reach, but in reach with the tool, those objects look closer when the participant reaches with the tool than when they don't have the tool to reach with. So this object, which is out of my reach, will seem closer if I have an object that allows me now to reach it. Okay? So I can extend your body, in this case the length of your arm, and in so doing I make closer those objects that have come into your action boundary. Longer ruler, shorter distance perceived. Okay, so these are going to be more fun. So in any one of my talks, there's one thing you're going to want to take home to Sweetie tonight. So when you go home and you have dinner with Sweetie, you say, I heard this great talk, I have no idea what this guy had to say, but wait till you hear this. And this is it. So this was found out by Sally Linkenauger. She was a graduate student of mine who graduated last year, and she's now at Max Planck Tübingen. And what she found out was if you're right-handed, you actually perceive your right arm and right hand to be longer and bigger than your left arm and hand. If you're left-handed, you perceive your body to be symmetrical. But if you're right-handed, this arm appears longer. Now, I have a strong identity with this. I'm a strong right-handed person. Well, not strong, but I am right-handed. And I feel as if my right arm has this long extent, and I am walking around with a little Tyrannosaurus Rex left arm appendage on the side of my body. So the way that we study this is participant comes into the lab, we say, put your finger right in that little dimple in your shoulder and look at your arm, and the experimenter takes a measuring tape, numbers facing the experimenter, and simply pulls it out and says, I'm going to move this back and forth until you tell me to make it visually match the length of your arm. Okay? And they do that, and then they'll do some other things, and then they'll do the other arm, and we counterbalance and all of that. And this is what you find. So what's being plotted here is for the left hand, so we're going to have estimated length over actual length, where one would be perfect. And if you're left-handed, okay, red stands for left arm, blue stands for right arm. If you're left-handed, you're pretty accurate, and both arms are perceived to be the same length. If you're right-handed, your right arm is perceived accurately. These are error bars. But you underestimate the length of your left arm by, looks like, about 7%. Okay? It's just perceived to be shorter. Well, if it's perceived to be shorter, then you should perceive that you can reach less far with it. And so to test this, what we do is, first of all, this is going to be important. First, we put the participant in the chair, and we clip her shirt to the chair. Because what happens is, if you're asked to do this and you're competitive, then you're going to reach forward and reach as far as you can. And then where are we? So we just want you to, how far can you reach with your arm? And then we'll move targets in on various rays, and we'll ask you, to tell us stop when you can just reach it with your right arm and when you can just reach it with your left arm. And here's what we find. So everybody overestimates their reachability, but of course they've had a lifetime experience not having their shirts clipped to the back of their chairs, and so that's not terribly surprising. But what's interesting is there's no difference in how far you believe you can reach with your right and left arms if you're left-handed. But if you're right-handed, you believe you can reach much farther with your right arm than with your left arm. But of course you do. That's because you perceive your right arm to be longer than your left arm. Now here's the task that we use for distance estimation. It's the same one we use for tools. So an individual sits at a table, and above the table is a projector, and the projector is going to project a target dot onto the table, and the person is to judge how far away that dot is from themselves or from this reference dot by adjusting two other lights back and forth. So again, they're doing a visual matching task. Make this distance the same as this distance. And then they reach out and they touch the dot, either with their right arm or with their left arm. Is that clear? Yep, okay. Now, if we think about action boundaries, if this is me with my big right arm, and this is me again, but now with my little left arm, and they are going to specify rulers, action boundary rulers, then I would measure this dot with my right arm as being 60% of my action boundary, but with my left arm, it's 75% of my action boundary. Again, the longer the ruler, the shorter the extent that is going to measure. Looking at what measurement theory tells us, if this is the actual distance and this is the measured distance using rulers of different lengths, then the shorter ruler will have a steeper slope, but it will have the same intercept. And these are the actual results. The left arm has a steeper slope and the same intercept relative to the right arm. And so objects that are within reach are perceived to be closer when you're going to attempt to reach with them with your right arm than with your left arm. What this means, of course, is that all of us right-handers are living in an asymmetrical space where, in part, and we know behaviorally people do this, we're going to reach over into the left side of our body with our right arm to pick something up because that space becomes expanded if we think about reaching for it with our left arm. Okay? So our space is asymmetrical. Yes?
So how much variation is there per person measured? In other words, is this a reliable predictor of whether someone is right or left-handed?
So you want to turn it around. We haven't actually done that to turn the statistics around, but there's not a great deal of variability. So right-handers tend to be very skewed in terms of they're not ambidextrous. A right-hander is right-handed. Left-handers tend to be ambidextrous. And so what we find is they have a very different distribution where they are slightly skewed towards the left, whereas the right-handers are strongly skewed towards the right. Left-handers are very, very different, in part because of genetics probably, in part because they live in a right-handed world. Also, if you look at the brains of right and left-handed people, so if you look at the regions involved in the sensory motor cortices and also in the parietal lobe for right-handers, there's considerably more cortex area devoted to the right arm and hand than the left arm and hand, whereas for left-handers it's symmetrical. Okay, so what about walking? So obviously if I'm going to think about walking from here to the top of the hill, I'm not going to measure that with the length of my arm. I need another ruler. And the ruler that we propose is that the way that you're going to measure it is in terms of how much walking is going to be required in order for me to get from where I'm standing to the location that I desire to go. And the way that we propose that you do that is with physiology. That is, you're going to measure how much walking in terms of the metabolic costs of walking. So here are just, we've been working on this for almost 20 years. First of all, we looked at perceived geographical slant. I think in Evan's poster there was a question, what is the steepest hill in San Francisco? How many of you said that it was 45 degrees? 18 degrees? Okay, that's right. It's 18 degrees. If you ask people how steep 18 degrees looks, they'll tell you that 18 degrees looks like it's 45 or 50 degrees. So we greatly overestimate hills, but we also overestimate them more when we have a greater physiological cost to ascending them. We've also been looking at distances. And similarly, we find in both distances and geographical slant perception that if you're encumbered by wearing a heavy backpack, hills look steeper, distances look farther. If you're physically fit, hills look more shallow, distances look more compressed. If you're elderly and aging, hills look steeper. If you're low on blood glucose, hills look steeper and and distances look more expanded. Yep.
So it's easier to walk down a hill than walk up a hill.
Yep.
But hills look steeper when you look down than when you look up.
Steep hills, so I have the data on this. Steep hills look steeper from the top than they do from the bottom. They look about the same up to 25 degrees. At 25 degrees, it is actually easier to walk up a hill than it is to walk down it, because for biomechanical reasons, if you're going to walk down a grassy slope that's 25 or 30 degrees, you're going to either have to butt scoot or break into a run, and it becomes a dangerous place. Okay? People on top of hills on skateboards find them really, really steep. Elderly people find steep hills really, really steep from the top. Okay? Anything else? This is good. All right, so I've hinted at physiology. Essentially what I'm arguing is that what you're doing all of the time as you walk around in the world is that you are doing an autocorrelation between where you intend to go and how much biological resources are required in order to get you there. In essence, you're measuring the world with your gas gauge. So we have all of those studies that demonstrate that sort of thing. I'm going to go over a recent one, which I think makes it really clear. So what we're going to do, what we've done here, this was done by John Zadra, who's a current graduate student. And we have an exercise physiology lab at the University of Virginia. It's in the medical center, it's the General Clinical Research Center. And we've got a group of highly trained and competitive bicycle riders who are willing to participate in this experiment for free just so that they can get the data about their own physiology. And here's what we did to them. So they come in and we get a distance judgment task. And the distance judgment task is you look some distance at a soccer cone and you're then asked to turn and walk in a different direction with your eyes closed, the distance that you perceive that cone to be. It turns out people are pretty good at this, and it works a lot better than asking them to give feet. It's because people are terrible at that. But they can actually do this pretty well, so that's why we use it. Then, through a small grant from Gatorade, we give them either Gatorade with a caloric sweetener or Gatorade with a non-caloric sweetener. We see them on 2 occasions, so this is within participant design. They don't know whether they're getting the caloric sweetened Gatorade or not. They ride on the bicycle for 45 minutes. When they're riding the bicycle, they are asked to pedal close to exhaustion. So there is a scale that they've learned called the Borg scale. For the Star Trekkers, there actually is a Borg scale. And it goes from 5 to 20, where 20 is exhausted and 5 is kind of where you are right now, seated. And they're asked to maintain a level of 17 or 18. So just below exhaustion. And they do that for 45 minutes. While they're doing that, we have a continuous measure of heart rate. We have a continuous measure of the power that they're putting into the bike. They're wearing an Opticon, so we have a continuous measure of their oxygen intake and carbon dioxide respiration. So we actually know how many calories they're burning. And we've got an intravenous line, and so we've got a continuous measure of a number of blood chemistries. And then when they're done, they do the distance measure again. So the first thing that we look at is, did the glucose manipulation have any effect? And it does. So what we're plotting on the left axis is we take the blind walking distance, and we have a number of these distances. So that's our dependent measure of perceived distance. And we divide that by the target distance. Okay, so if it was 1, they would be accurate. If it's over 1, they're overestimating. If it's under 1, they're underestimating. So they're pretty accurate. I'm sorry, it would be 0. Wait, it would be 1. And then what we do is we take a post minus pretest to see what the difference is between what they did initially and what they did after riding the bicycle. And the bottom line is that if you had the placebo, then after you rode the bicycle, the target seems farther away. If you've had the carbohydrate load, then it's actually slightly closer. So this is a difference based upon basically whether or not you got glucose prior to riding the bicycle. Okay, that's the manipulation. Much more interesting than that is we have individual differences in our bicycle racers. So what we're going to look at here is these are the blind walking distances after they rode the bicycle. So this is not a pre-minus post. This is just at the very end, how far away did they see the target? And what you're going to see is how far away they saw the target is essentially a function of their own physical fitness. So here is, what we're plotting here is how much energy did they put into the bike? And what we're plotting here is how far away did they see the target, where 1 would be dividing apparent over actual would be perfect. Anything less than that's a slight underestimation. And so the more energy you put into the target, into the bicycle, the farther away the target appeared at the very end of the ride. And these red lines are lines of variability. Okay, so the harder you worked, the farther away the target appears. Blood lactate. So blood lactate is a good measure of physical fitness. The more blood lactate you have following vigorous exercise, the less physically fit you are. The higher your blood lactate, the farther away the target appears. Heart rate. The higher your heart rate is another good measure of physical fitness. The higher your heart rate, given that you're attempting to ride at a particular level of exertion, the less physically fit you are. The higher your heart rate, the farther away the target appears. Energy expenditure. Here what we're measuring is oxygen calories by measuring the oxygen that you're burning during respiration. Again, the more calories that you expend, the farther away the target appears. Another measure of physical fitness relative to apparent distance. And then finally, we have blood glucose. The higher your blood glucose level following the bike ride, the closer the target appears. So what we're showing here is that in cases where you're measuring walkable distances, you're measuring it with your physiology, with your gas gauge. How much energy is it going to be required for me to walk an extent relative to what I've got in the tank? Last set of examples. So the last thing we're going to look at is behavior in the sense of, for example, hitting a baseball, skilled performance. So in terms of skilled performance, what becomes relevant is behavior, and in particular, your immediate actions. So there are a bazillion sports anecdotes saying that the world looks different depending upon how well my performance in the particular relevant sport is. So Mickey Mantle, after hitting a particularly momentous home run, stated, "I just saw the ball as big as a grapefruit." So we're going to look at that. This work was done primarily, again, with Jesse Witt. And here's what we did in our first experiment. So we're going to look at balls as big as a grapefruit problem by looking at softball players at the local softball fields. And so what she did is she went to the fields, and there would be a game going on, softball game. And when the game was over, the players would come out, and Jesse would smile at them and point towards some free sports drinks and say, "For 2 minutes of your time, you get a free drink." And she's very attractive, and they would come over. And the first thing that she would do is she would say, "Here's a sheet of paper, it's got a bunch of circles on it. Point to the one that's the size of a softball." And then after that, she would find out how many at-bats they had and how many hits they had. And these are the results. The higher your batting average, the bigger the ball. Okay, so what's going on here? What we're arguing is that you measure the size of the ball with the variability in your hitting. So if you're hitting well versus you're not hitting well, it's probably the case that the mean of your bat swing is centered on the ball, but if you're not hitting well, you have a much greater variability. Whereas if you're hitting well, you have a small variability. If we measure the ball with the confidence interval or the statistical variability, let's say standard deviation of hitting well versus not hitting well, then this is roughly plus or minus 1 standard deviation, whereas this one is considerably larger. I'm seeing smaller. Okay. So here's plus or minus 1 standard deviation. These are covered up here. The smaller the ruler, the bigger the object's being measured. So if you're measuring your performance, as you're measuring the ball with your performance, and you're measuring it with the variability in your performance, the greater your variability, the smaller the ball. The smaller your variability, the larger the ball. We did the same thing with putting. We did it on a golf course where we had people on the 18th green, and we would get their performance following playing golf. We did it in the laboratory. And it's the same idea. You're going to measure the size of the golf hole by the variability in your putting performance. The better you are at putting, the bigger the hole looks. And then finally, you can actually change people's behavior in putting by an illusion that changes the apparent size of the hole. So this is called the Ebbinghaus illusion. If you take a circle and you, in this case, this is our putting green and we're going to project down circles around it. If you put large circles around a circle versus small circles around a circle, this makes the hole look smaller. When you do this, people say, well, yeah, this hole looks smaller, but they don't putt as well. They putt better to the hole that has been made to be bigger through an illusion. The holes are the same size, but their performance is better because the hole looks bigger. Now here's a cool, and this is the Mueller-Lyer illusion. These two black lines are the same extent, but this one looks longer. So what it does is it doesn't change the apparent size of the hole, but it changes your apparent sense of your own variability. So for a given extent change, miss of the hole in your performance is going to be seen as being greater in this context than that context. That is, if your variability is the same in both of these contexts, it's going to appear to be greater in this one because everything's being stretched out horizontally. And in this case, people perceive the hole as being smaller here than they do there because of the change in the variability that they saw in their performance with regards to the hole. Okay. Yes? To measure what? Depends on the experiment. So in some experiments, we get estimates of the hole before and some afterwards. So we need to find out if the illusion is working, so we do that before. In other experiments, we'll just do it afterwards. And so there's a reciprocal relationship such that if you're seeing the hole or the ball is bigger, then you're hitting better. If you hit better, your variability seems smaller. Your smaller variability makes the ball look bigger still, and it just works on itself. And of course, it works in the other direction. If you're not hitting well, the ball looks smaller. The smaller the ball looks, the less confidence you have in your hitting. Your swing becomes worse, and everything falls apart. And that's where I am. So our belief is there's a reciprocal relationship. That you're going to play better if you see it bigger, but if you see it bigger, it's going to appear even bigger because you're playing better.
I was getting to that. I would expect that it would actually grow. You start, you don't play well, and you see smaller again, you don't play well, and you're smaller.
I agree. That's up to some limit. I think that's what ought to happen. We haven't shown that yet, but we would like to. Yeah.
Have you seen any evidence of professional athletes trying to use some of these techniques in their training regimen?
No. So the question is, have we seen professional athletes using these techniques to try to improve their performance? No. We're working on this, especially with golf. There's a lot of money to be made in golf. Well, you can imagine that if you make the whole illusory bigger and they perform better, and then they go out and there's no projected circles around the hole, it's going to look smaller and they're going to do worse. So it's not clear to us what exactly it is you want to do. But we'd like to know. Yeah. Yep.
Putting weights on a bat when you're warming up, similar?
I'm not sure about the putting weights on a bat. I've thought a lot about that. I don't know that that's the same thing we're studying or not. It may be. I don't know. It makes the bat feel lighter, but if you always do it, then it always feels like it is. The main thing in terms of performance for swinging the bat is that you want to do it exactly the same every time. So if you're going to weight the bat and you believe that that works, you need to do it every time, because if you don't do it, you're not going to swing well. Okay, so I'm going to sum up, and then hopefully we'll have time for more questions. So the basic idea is, going back to me and the frog, we all assume that we all see the same thing, but across species, but we don't. We see what is specific to our phenotype, in that case to our species. We then assume that, well, okay, everyone that is the same species sees everything the same. And yeah, we kind of do, but we also don't. We scale things differently. The information does not come in units that are appropriate for what it is that we perceive, extents and sizes. So we need to scale them, and the way that we scale them is to our body. And just as Gulliver and little pollutions live in a differently scaled world, you and left-handers and right-handers and tall people and short people and people with long arms and big hands and all of this, we all see the world in different ways. Moreover, our physical fitness, as we've shown, changes the way you see the world. Your current energetic state and your ability to expend energy will change the way you see the world. And of course, your purposes change the way you see the world. So you see the world in terms of what you're trying to do and what you've made your body into. And when you're pursuing different ends than someone else, you're seeing a different world as being measured with a different yardstick. So the information comes to us in this form. There is no extent, there's only information about where things are. There's in terms of location. There's no information about distance or extent or size without it being transformed into a scale appropriate for those measurements. The measurement units come from our body, morphology, physiology, and behavior. That aspect of our body that is used depends on our purposes. Our purposes in an environment cause us to undergo a phenotypic reorganization in which we turn our body into a machine to perform the actions that we want to perform. That reorganization makes relevant what part of our body should be used for scaling. Reaching, it's my arm. Walking, it's my physiology. Sports performance, it's the variability in my performance. And those body scale units, once so defined, provide the meaning for the basic layout of our environment as we perceive it. Thank you. So, yes?
To what extent do different camera lenses play into this picture about the imagery that we see through them?
Okay, camera lenses. So I can't really answer that very well. There is a certain assumption that people have that the elevation of the camera is roughly at their eye height and that the field of view is somewhere roughly around 55 degrees. And then when you stretch things out farther than that, things seem to be farther away than they are. When you pull the camera angle in, things seem to be closer than they are. But it's really the elevation of the camera that gets into the nature of the body size. If I want to make something look big, I just put my camera down low. If I'm Sylvester Stallone and I want to be filmed, then I make them put the camera down here and I look like I'm a big guy.
You think that's has more impact than the width of the lens?
No, I'm not saying that. The width of the lens mattered, but it has more to do with certain default assumptions that we have about pictures than the body. Yeah.
Do we make different default assumptions whether we're sitting down looking at, say, a workstation or standing up looking at a cell phone? You see what I'm getting at? That if we're projecting the same imagery in people on this versus a cell phone, are they going to interpret that differently?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah. So if you're measuring, if you're looking at a cell phone, you're measuring it with your hand. If you're looking at a big image at a sports bar, you're probably measuring it with your eye height. Okay? And what we know from a lot of the research that we've done is that big displays and little displays treat things very, very differently. So for example, anything that's big gets stretched vertically in our perception. Okay, it's a vertical horizontal illusion. You get it no matter what the size of the object is, but the bigger the object and the bigger the display you put it on, the more it gets stretched. So if I take a picture of a building and I show it on a small screen, the person will stretch it a lot in order for them to say it looks right. So the smaller the display you put it on, the more vertical compression you're getting relative to what things would look like if they were actually looking at the real thing. In another paper that I'm working on, Impressionist painters like Monet know this, and when they paint things that are really big, they will exaggerate the vertical extent of what they're painting so that it'll look like what it would look like when you're actually looking at the thing in itself. So that's, yeah, there's a lot of tuning that could be done on displays of different sizes in order to make things look the way they would look when you would actually saw them. And this is relevant for Street View. An image on Street View looked at on a small display just gets compressed like this compared to what things look like when you're actually looking at it.
Another question I have is, when we designed the cameras for Street View, we had to make a decision. We could either allow the images to look sheared, which definitely looked wrong, or we could allow them to look compressed laterally. And we chose the latter. So all the images in Street View are screwed up in the sense that they look compressed laterally. And this is it doesn't matter why it is. That's the deal. Mm-hmm. So.
But if you compress it laterally, then you're changing the horizontal vertical ratio. That's how things get compressed vertically when you put them in the small display. Right. So your intuition is compress them again this way and they'll look better.
No, I'm not saying we did that to make it look better. I'm saying we were screwed by the physics of the camera, and I had to do something, so I did that. Like I had one or two bad choices.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, though. The reason I picked that is because I noticed that you go back then when I went to a sports bar or something, you'd see these HDTV displays, and they've got a sort of wider aspect ratio, and they'd be putting standard definition imagery on it and just stretching them out laterally. People don't seem to care.
No, they don't.
And people are very insensitive to how to scale things on horizontally. And so I assumed it didn't matter. But it sounds like what you're saying is it does matter. It's gonna...
It depends on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at a sports bar, you're looking at people. People don't get distorted when you look at them. If you're looking at a building, it gets distorted when you look at it. It gets elongated this way in the real world. And then when you put it on your small screen, it gets compressed this way. And so to make it look natural, you want to stretch it this way again. Depends on how big something is, conditionalizes how much it's distorted by the fact that we look at it. So you get a small horizontal vertical illusion for small figures of a nature. I mean, it's not terribly small, but it's like 7%. If you're looking at a big object outside, it can be over 20%. Okay, so there's big things that are hard to act on. Once it gets over about 2 eye heights, it just gets stretched this way when we look at it in the real world. And then when you put it on the display and you're measuring with your hand, it goes back, it gets compressed back this way relative to, even though the geometry is right, relative to what it would look like outdoors, it gets compressed this way.
What I've noticed is that if I look on Street View and I look at my route that I take to go home, I can take arbitrary points in that route and I don't recognize them instantly. It's not instantaneous. If I'm driving, it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
My wife could be driving me home, I can close my eyes, I can get halfway there, open my eyes, I've got it within 10th of a second, I know where I am. That's not true on Street View, and I don't understand why.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, one of them is you're not looking at them from the same perspective. You're not looking at them from the same angle, because you're able to move your eyes around, you're taking a lot more. Part of it is the compression that your medium is putting on it. It's just changing the aspect ratio of what you're seeing. And part of it is you don't know where it is. You've disconnected it from the spatial understanding that you normally have. So when you're driving in your car, you know where you are. And what it means to know where you are is that you know where you are relative to other things that you can't see in the environment. Okay, you know I'm heading up the peninsula, heading towards the Golden Gate Bridge, the ocean's on my left, the mountains are here, the mountains are over there. You know where these things are, even though you can't see them. When you take an image and you put it out of context, you don't know where it is in all of those things. And so you've got to build a mental model of where you're looking before you can really appreciate what you're looking at. Yep.
In Google, there's an option where you can adjust this elevation exaggeration that automatically changes from rendering things truthfully using physics to making mountains look bigger. And I find that things look a lot more realistic to me if I make that like 1.5 or 2. And I was wondering, like maybe I'm perceiving it like everybody else, and
Yeah.
Do you think there's a strong argument for making that kind of thing the default? What sort of numbers do you think are reasonable for?
It depends again what you're looking at. So if you're looking at buildings, then making it, 20% bigger is probably a good idea. And if it's on a really small display, maybe even more than that. If you're looking at a mailbox, you don't want to distort it. Now you've got to decide what's important in your image. If what's important are the background buildings, then elongate them. If what is important are the things that are normally at eye height, then you don't want to distort them.
Thank you very much, Denny. He'll be around for answering some more questions. If you'd like to stick around, we have this room, I think, for another half hour. And thank you very much, everyone.